After crushing electoral defeat, a Portland, Maine landlord sounds off against why rent control laws hurt small mom and pop landlords. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Portland, Maine. Now, I just reported recently how Portland, Maine, the landlords there, they tried to get part of the rent control law repealed so that, small mom and pop landlords with fewer units would be able to at least operate and be able to raise rents, right? And unfortunately, it didn't pass. Okay, it didn't pass at all. I'm not too surprised about that. In fact, it was a horrible defeat. I mean, it was just overwhelming how many people voted against this modification to the rent control law. So rent control has a huge amount of support, and it's bad for the landlords. It's really bad for the landlords, especially the mom and pops who kept their rents low. And that's what this author, or the person who wrote this article, is saying. Okay, they're saying that, hey, the people who kept their rents low, they're getting screwed over by this law. And that's why they wanted to modify it in the first place. Unfortunately, nobody talks about what the end result, what the consequences of this law are going to be. They think, oh, well, the people, they're just going to have cheaper housing. This just doesn't work that way. Okay, there's always going to be unintended consequences. And in the case of most rent control laws, it's going to be a shortage of affordable housing, just a straight shortage of it, because landlords who were, perfectly happy to participate in the rental market, they're going to back out. They're going to not rent their properties. They're going to convert them over to other uses. And that's what we have seen happen all throughout the entire country. And then we're going to see an explosion of housing prices in places that are not under rent control. So if this, for example, if this law only is within the city limits of Portland, Maine, then you might go to a suburb of Portland, right, and find, oh wow, the housing costs here are outrageous. Why is that? That's because that is the only place where there is affordable housing supply. Okay, so the costs are getting driven up by the fact that, hey, all the housing over here is under rent control. So I tell everybody, if you are in a place with rent control, get the heck out of there. Go invest in one of the neighboring cities where there is no rent control so that you can get around it. Okay, that's what I would do. I wouldn't waste my time investing in Portland, Maine. There's going to be a lot less landlords who are willing to participate in that sort of program. Okay, so I don't blame anybody for getting frustrated, but the people who already own housing there, who were already renting it out, and who are keeping it affordable, they're getting punished just like everyone else, and that's unfortunate. That is very unfortunate. So, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. So, just in case I haven't mentioned it before, there's a lot of different consequences, unintended consequences of rent control laws, right? And like, what would you do if the city that you were investing in suddenly decided to pass rent control? Would you sell your properties? Would you convert them over to other uses? I mean, what would you do? Would you continue to operate? And if you did continue to operate, how would you go about making sure that you were able to stay profitable? Okay, so I'm just curious what the other landlords on here would say. Anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from the portlandpressherald.com, and it says, letter to the editor, many landlords are simply neighbors providing housing. And I've mentioned this before many times, okay, especially when we're talking about the mom and pop landlords. They live nearby the properties that they own. Okay, they self-manage a lot of them. Some of them do the maintenance work themselves. Okay, they collect the rent checks themselves. A lot of them are keeping, especially the small mom and pop ones, are keeping their rents lower cost, below market rent levels, while the bigger landlords are, keeping them closer to the market rates, right? So these people are providing the affordable housing, but now they're getting punished. They're getting punished badly for doing that, and this is part of the reason why I say take your emotions out of the picture. Take your emotions out of the picture. Operate like you are a business, not like you're just doing this as a hobby, even if you only own one house. Okay. So, anyway, let's get into it. Rent control appeals to renters. So would free housing. Renters outnumber landlords in Portland, so promising cheaper rent wins elections. However, rent is not cheaper since rent control started. My tenants pay more now because I impose an annual increase to protect my property value. This is because I cannot raise rent to market value when a tenant moves out. Three of my units pay discounted rates because they are good tenants. I want them to stay and I prefer not to raise rent on an existing tenant. I used to raise rent to market value only for a new tenant. Unfortunately, I and any future owner of the building am locked in to any discount permanently. Rent control disincentivizes landlords from offering reduced rent to good tenants. So, from the sound of it, right, the rent control law within Portland does not allow them to be able to raise rent up to the market rate if a tenant leaves of their own free will. So, if they decide, hey, I want to move out, you cannot say, okay, well, I'm gonna for the next tenant who moves in, I'm going to charge market rate. No, you have to keep your rents artificially low forever, and that's a huge problem. So what a lot of landlords do, and this is something that I used to do, I don't do it anymore, even here, okay? But you have a tenant move in. Let's say your tenant is paying $1,000 a month, right? And you just decide not to raise the rent on that tenant while that tenant is living there. So if the tenant is there for 3 years, 3 years into the future, that tenant is still paying $1,000 a month. But now with these rent control laws, and I don't know how much they are allowing the landlords to raise the rent, but we'll just say 5%, right? So now the landlord says, if I don't raise the rent 5% on this tenant every single year, I will never get that rent increase back. Okay, I'll be stuck at that $1,000 even for the next tenant. So the first year, raise it 5%, you're up to $1,050. The next year, you raise it another 5%. The third year, you raise it another 5%, and so basically the good tenant ends up with a much higher rent than what they started out with, even though your intention was never to raise the rent on that tenant in the first place. So, I mean, it's a smart business move to be, keeping the rents up to market rates. I admit that, right? But some landlords are more concerned with making sure that their tenants stay in their units and are able to afford the rent versus trying to, constantly raise the rents. So, I mean, it's a different strategy. I personally have no problem with it for small mom and pop landlords if that's what they want to do. But in the case of rent control, you have to raise the rent. Otherwise, you lose that rent increase forever. And that's what this guy is saying. This is an unintended consequence of rent control, but the Democratic Socialists of America refuse to talk to landlords about reasonable solutions. The nationwide housing shortage has increased expenses for everyone, making property unaffordable for most investors and renters. Many small landlords invested in Portland for the long term as supplemental income once our mortgages are paid in 30 years. We are not property management companies or absentee landlords. And see, that's the big thing right there, right? Small mom and pop landlords, they actually make up the largest number of landlords. And even though they might not own the most units, they do make up the largest sheer number of landlords, right? And you're telling these people that, hey, we don't want you to be in business. We don't want you to be able to make a profit. We don't want you investing here in our city. And they're going to take note of that. A lot of the people who previously would have become accidental landlords are just going to sell those properties to other owner occupants. Okay, that's what the result of this sort of thing is going to be. So, like I said at the very beginning of this video, we're going to see a lot less rental housing, and then the affordable housing numbers are going to decline. Okay, and maybe the landlords will invest outside of the city, maybe they'll invest outside of the state, whatever they decide. Maybe they'll decide not to invest at all, but whatever they decide, it's not going to make housing more affordable for the people who need it. Now, it will, for the lucky few who happen to be inside their units when rent control passed and were already paying below market level rents, they are going to be locked in at super cheap rents forever. Aren't they lucky? Well, they're the only ones. They're the only ones who are going to get away with this and end up in a position better than otherwise, right? But for everyone else, this is just a sucky idea. I encourage the DSA in Portland to see us as neighbors providing housing and a source of accurate economic information rather than price gougers, and to consider working with small landlords in the future. Joanne Huntington from Portland. And Joanne, if you see this video, just know for a fact that democratic socialists are not going to ever work with us, okay? They're communists, okay? They want the government to own everything. They don't believe in property rights. They think that landlords are evil. You're wasting your time talking to them, okay? Instead, you vote with your wallet, which means that disinvest in that city. Disinvest in a place that doesn't treat you with respect. You don't have to put your money there. You know what? Just say, I don't care. I don't care if these people, these tenants, have affordable housing. That's somebody else's problem. Only thing you should care about is taking care of yourself. Okay, making sure that your business is profitable. Okay, now that might mean selling now, because 10 years from now it might be too late. It might be you're stuck in a position where things are really really bad, right? But right now you might still be able to get out and get into something else nearby that isn't under rent control.